and welcome to the Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. This episode is supported by 21 Lectures. 21 Lectures' mission is to bring more developers to the Bitcoin ecosystem with in-person courses. Lectured by world-renowned Bitcoin and Lightning developers, courses teach participants the fundamentals to work with blockchain technologies. To learn more, visit 21lectures.com. This episode has support from Core Ledger. Core Ledger is a blockchain-based peer-to-peer transaction infrastructure provider. It enables businesses to document, tokenize, and trade any type of assets in a reliable and flexible environment. Core Ledger makes anything transactable, literally anything. To learn more about Core Ledger's technology and how you can transform your business onto blockchain, visit coreledger.net. That's CoreLedger.net. coreledger.net. My guest today is Alexis Gauba. Alexis is a co-founder of She256, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing diversity and breaking down barriers to entry in the blockchain space. She is studying electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley and has been actively involved in the blockchain space as a co-founder of Mechanism Labs, conducting research on distributed consensus and usability. And now to the conversation with Alexis Gauba. Hi, Alexis, and many thanks for taking time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Alexis, you're part of several blockchain projects, including She256. So let's maybe start with what you're doing there.
She256 is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing diversity and breaking down barriers to entry in the blockchain space. So the thesis of the organization is that we believe that blockchain technology will fundamentally form a basis of our financial and governance-based futures. And as such, it's crucial that the people building these technologies are representative of the global diverse population which they are to serve. And so along those lines, we have a couple of key goals. One, to increase awareness about diversity and inclusion in the blockchain space. And two, to make all of this very, very accessible to people who haven't even heard of blockchain before. So it's a lot about raising awareness, building community, and providing education.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. How did the project start?
So the project just started in February of 2018, and it was really organic. It was, I was, studying electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley, and, I was very privy to all of the ratios and the diversity in my CS classes. And I didn't necessarily think it could get worse, but I ended up going to a bunch of blockchain events and it was worse. And I was, pretty much taken aback, very shocked. And I found that other females in the space had a similar experience. And so there was just one event in Berkeley, and it was me and a couple of other friends who were there. And we realized that we were the only females in the room, like just the four of us out of 60 people. And then at that point, we kind of got together after that event. We were like, okay, something clearly needs to be done. Like, this is not okay. Mm-hmm. And so we started thinking, okay, what can we do to introduce this technology to more people at the university level? And then we were like, okay, why stop there? Like, there's so much more we could do here. So many more people who we can bring into the space. And that's kind of where the impetus for our first conference came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What are some of the activities that you have? You have, I spoke with Aparna, with your co-founder, about it a while back, and she mentioned there's mentorship programs.
Yeah.
But I don't think we spoke about conferences.
For sure. Yeah. So Aparna is my co-founder with Mechanism Labs, and Sarah and Meta are the co-founders of She256. They're absolutely amazing, and I'm so glad to be able to work with each and every one of them. And so we do have a whole host of initiatives with She256. So we have our annual conference, and the goal of our annual conference last year was very specifically to feature the groundbreaking work of female researchers and innovators in the blockchain space, and to really highlight the amazing work that they were already doing to inspire the next generation to know that they could do that as well. But since then, after seeing how the conference went and how the community received it, which was super, super supportive, we realized that there was a lot more that we could do here. So this fall, or last fall now, we launched our mentorship program. And the goal there was to pair female identifying individuals of all ages and backgrounds. So, we have some people participating who are high schoolers all the way, to like mid-career professionals who are looking to potentially change careers and are trying to explore blockchain. So any one of these individuals would get paired with a professional in the blockchain space, and that way they would have someone to help guide them through this journey and make it less intimidating, which I think is really important. And the program currently has around 500 participants, which is super, super exciting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned, that it can be intimidating to people, blockchain technology, when they first get into it. So what is one specific advice, that you would give someone who's interested in getting started with this technology?
For sure. I think one key thing is to kind of have that frame going in where that there's a lot of content and a lot of material and a lot of jargon. So you're aware that it can be intimidating, but not to get disheartened by that, because there are so many resources out there and so many ways to get involved. And what I would say to anyone who is definitely looking to get into the space and might be a little intimidated is that even though there is all this jargon and this initial barrier to entry, it's not like other fields where you have to go get a PhD to be able to contribute or anything like that. It's still such a young field, which means there are so many problems to be solved, so many ways to contribute all across the board, whether that's development or design or policy or economics. And so the biggest thing is not to get disheartened, but to use the wealth of resources that are available. So many people in this space are pretty open and welcoming and open and receptive to answering questions and bringing new people in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But what is something specific? Let's say I haven't really heard much of what blockchains are, what cryptocurrencies are, and I somehow want to learn more about it. I mean, what's the first thing I should do?
I'd say that definitely depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. Like if you've heard about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and that it's something you really want to learn a lot about, I would recommend Blockchain at Berkeley's edX course. I think it's a really, really great introduction to the space, but obviously taking an edX course requires a little bit more commitment. Other than that, I think there are some really amazing Medium blog posts to take a look at, which would be a good introduction. So Zubin Koticha has a really awesome introduction to blockchain through crypto economics. Preeti Kasareddy has some great introductory blog posts. And there's a bunch more that are floating around on Medium. So I think that's a really good way to just start by reading one article, figuring out what you know, learning what you don't know, and then deciding what you have the bandwidth for, whether that's a full course or maybe looking at some books if that's your thing. So Blockchain at Berkeley has a lot of course notes. So they have I think a blockchain textbook sort of thing on GitHub. There's the Princeton textbook. There's obviously Mastering Bitcoin and Mastering Ethereum. So I think these are all some great introductory resources. And She256 is going to be putting out a more comprehensive beginner's guide to help people answer the same question, hopefully in the next month or so. And so it should hopefully have subcategories. So if you're a designer, it'll have design-focused resources, or an economist, economics-focused resources, versus there just being this intimidating mass of Medium posts and articles and all these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. In your experience, what is the wrong way to get into it?
I don't necessarily think there's a particularly wrong way to get into it. I think with anything, it's definitely a journey, and you're learning and growing along each step of the way. I think it's just important to keep an open mind and understand that there are so many different variables or factors that are playing into this space and different subsets. So there are people interested in research, there are people interested in trading, there are people interested in development, and all of these different sub-communities. And just like human beings themselves, these sub-communities can tend to be pretty aggressive when talking about maybe their own particular viewpoint or something like that. So I definitely think the best thing to do is to keep an open mind, to explore, and to come into this wanting to learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the main hurdle, for people to get familiar with blockchain technology and crypto assets?
I think usually it's just the way that we explain Bitcoin or the way that we explain blockchain technology can often be confusing to people. And I think, and I think people have realized that and have been developing, things like these courses or these blog posts that do a better job of explaining these things. But finding the signal in the noise is still a little bit difficult. So, if I'm new and I just Google search like Bitcoin or blockchain, is the number one hit going to be the best explanation? Probably not. The better way is probably through like word of mouth or talking to a friend who is maybe more experienced in the space, or looking at another like reputable source to find a resource that can explain things better. So I guess it's definitely also a little bit of this like search complexity. And I think this probably goes for most fields in general. Like if you're trying to learn a lot about a new field, the best way to do it is probably to ask an expert, depending on how niche the field is. So, if I wanted to learn about some sort of historical event, then maybe like Google and Wikipedia would do like an amazing job of like explaining that to me, because that's knowledge that's been around for a while and has already been ingrained and categorized in a specific way. But when it comes to newer things, so say I wanted to learn about like preserving privacy in machine learning algorithms, a Google search probably wouldn't be as helpful to me as talking to someone who's working in that space who can recommend a more introductory article or something of that nature.
And also I think this whole space obviously is so saturated with, some kind of obfuscated advertising and marketing.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? When somebody wants to read into the technology and then they'll just end up with a whole bunch of, articles on Medium that were written for the sole purpose of spinning some kind of coin or something like this.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's frustrating. And I think that's why it's really important to look to like reputable sources or sources that where their incentives are, to educate. So organizations like Blockchain at Berkeley or She256 or others that are really trying to educate and don't necessarily have like some sort of alternate purpose. Like another great resource are a lot of these conferences that are put on, like MIT Bitcoin Expo or the Crypto Economic Security Conference, which have some great videos. And again, these are more reputable sources than another project that might have different incentives. So looking at like the mission of the project and kind of using that as a lens for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. In She256, the mentorship program that you're running there, is it mostly geared toward people in academia, students, or are there all kinds of people from all walks of life in there?
There are definitely all kinds of people from all walks of life. And I think that's one of the things that makes the program so special. So it is pairing up someone with a mentor in the blockchain space who is a professional in this field, but also very specifically like a subfield. So maybe they're like a blockchain developer or a blockchain designer. So if you're new to the space and you have some like design background, saying you want to understand blockchain from that lens, then you can get paired with someone who's been doing blockchain from that angle. So it's definitely meant to cater to as many people interested in as many different things as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's say somebody is studying at the moment and isn't quite sure if he or she wants to work as a researcher or in the industry, as a coder or developer. How would you advise students to position themselves so they have the best options in the future?
I would definitely say, regardless of what you're doing currently or what you've done in the past or what you're doing in the future, to like follow what interests you most, where you want to learn and where you want to grow, and definitely not to be boxed in by a particular role or a particular current state. Like even if you're, doing development at one given time and you want to do design at another time, then definitely go for it. I think it's really useful to look at these things as journeys of like learning and growth, more than being particularly bound to positioning a certain role in a certain way.
Yeah. Excellent. Alexis, Before we started recording, we spoke about some of the upcoming initiatives that you're planning with She 256. I wanted to ask you again to, explain some of these initiatives because I think they're really interesting.
For sure. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and I'm really looking forward to it. So one of the initiatives that we're starting pretty soon will be fundamentals and development boot camps for underrepresented high school students. So we're going to be doing a pilot program for this in Berkeley and Oakland for these next couple of months and seeing how that goes and then hopefully expanding based on that. And the curriculum is being developed by a couple of people within the organization and will be completely open source. So hopefully anyone will be able to utilize that and hopefully that will be able to be helpful to them. And so we're looking forward to that. We also have a UI UX design hackathon coming up in March. So that will be March 9th through 10th. And that's also focused on high school students. And, the expectation there is people can come in not knowing anything at all, but then leave understanding, one, the design thinking process and how to problem solve, and two, how to apply that to blockchain technology.
Cool.
And we'll have I'm really looking forward to that as well. I think that kind of thinking would be really beneficial to the blockchain space and a really accessible way for people to get involved without having to, dive into any particular code bases or anything like that. And then we have our annual conference coming up again at the end of April, which I'm really looking forward to. This year, we're going to have a workshop track as well. So there'll be some more educational opportunities that are hands-on. And then we'll have our primary speaking track similar to last year, which will feature research talks, technical talks, talks about design, open source, law, social impact. So we're definitely expanding the scope of what we're going to cover. And it'll again feature some really amazing women researchers and innovators. And so we're really looking forward to that as well. We also just recently announced Fireside Chats, which will be a weekly newsletter chatting with a different woman in the blockchain space and talking about their journey and what they're working on now and their advice. So I think those will be great as well. And we're always looking to do different kinds of smaller educational events and meetups and things of that nature. And so there's a lot we can do here and we're really looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Excellent. I mean, it's interesting, of course, She 256 mostly gears toward, people who are female and are interested in blockchains. But the narratives, I think, right, for males or females are probably similar, right? What fascinates people about blockchains? Or do you see there a difference between if somebody's a man or a woman?
Okay, a couple of things. So I think the first thing, She 256 definitely started off as a women in blockchain focused organization, but we really do recognize the need for a truly diverse set of people working on these technologies. And so we're trying to focus more of our efforts to cater to all underrepresented minorities. Now, obviously, that's like a very large net to cast. And our familiarity is with women in particular. And so a lot of our events are still women specific and providing those opportunities there to close those gaps. But we are also actively working on learning and figuring out how we can help other individuals who don't necessarily have access to these resources. So for example, the development boot camps and the UI UX design hackathon, the target audience for both of those is really anyone who wants to learn, but we're specifically reaching out to underrepresented minorities, whether male or female, and people from lower income backgrounds who maybe don't necessarily have access to the same resources as people from other backgrounds, and reaching out to basically more people who people aren't necessarily reaching out to right now. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big thing for us, like figuring out what is most effective and going to these communities, like talking to people, figuring out what they're interested in, and really just trying to be as welcoming as possible to make this, to basically make this as what can be pretty intimidating as, I guess, less intimidating as possible. I mean, that's clearly not the best verbiage, but that's what we're thinking right now. In terms of like your question, going back to your question about narratives, I don't necessarily think that the narrative that gets people excited differs based on like gender specifically. I think usually like when we introduce the topics to different people, we'll talk about the potential that this technology can unlock. So we'll talk about really exciting breakthroughs like the ability to have decentralized autonomous organizations or stable coins, or to be able to send feeless cross-border transfers, or the other very high-level, very exciting promises that this technology can unlock. And I think that's a really good way to bring people in, because then you get them excited, you get them invested, they start to care. And once people start to care about what's going on here, then that's when the problems become really, really interesting, because they realize that there's so much that they can do and contribute to right now to help build that up.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Have those narratives, have they changed in the last few years for you personally?
I think, for me personally, like I initially was really interested in this technology because it was intellectually stimulating. I had been interested in like the intersection of, game theory and computer science for a while. And this presented a lot of really interesting like technological problems in this space. But, the more I've been in this space, it's definitely been more than that. Like the ethos in this space is something that I think is really, really unique that I haven't been able to find elsewhere. And the potential that a lot of these technologies can unlock for underserved populations globally is really high. And so I definitely think for me, it's changed from just being something that was purely intellectually stimulating to also like philosophy and ethos driven.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. This episode is supported by 21 Lectures. 21 Lectures' mission is to bring more developers to the Bitcoin ecosystem with in-person courses. Lectured by world-renowned Bitcoin and Lightning developers, courses teach participants the fundamentals to work with blockchain technologies. 21 Lectures covers cryptography, the structure of transactions and blocks and how they are chained, smart contract language, the Lightning protocol, as well as software and toolkits to develop on top of the blockchain and Lightning. To learn more, visit 21lectures.com. This episode has support from Core Ledger. Core Ledger is a blockchain-based peer-to-peer transaction infrastructure provider. It enables businesses to document, tokenize, and trade any type of assets in a reliable and flexible environment. Core Ledger makes anything transactable, literally anything. With Core Ledger's highly dependable, fast-to-implement products, businesses can reduce costs and improve processes. Individuals can benefit from the full ownership of their own assets and make transactions directly with another party. To learn more about Core Ledger's technology and how you can transform your business onto blockchain, visit coreledger.net. That's coreledger.net. coreledger.net. Let's speak a little bit about one of your other projects, Mechanism Labs. Mm-hmm. I spoke with your co-founder, Aparna, about it a while back, and she explained already a few things there. But I'm interested in, some of the current questions that you're working on.
Yeah, for sure. So lately we've been thinking a lot about usability and how these technologies can actually be useful to a lot of the populations who would maybe benefit from them the most. So we've been thinking about questions along that line, and we've been doing some field research in India and talking to lots of different populations there to understand, what their particular needs are and what the payment infrastructure currently looks like in that country, and where this technology could even be applicable. I think it's important to balance like the theoretical research with also talking to people who this could benefit, working with communities to understand their particular problems. And so it's definitely a balance. And I think it's really important to being well informed on either end.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the specific research questions that you examine at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, so we're starting this new study after our deep dive into distributed consensus protocols. So it's still pretty early. We're doing a lot of like very exploratory research and generative interviews with individuals to build this initial understanding. And that'll help us figure out like where to narrow down and ask even more specific questions.
So, but with Mechanism Labs, do you think it's a research institute or a think tank or more like a launch pad, maybe for projects that can be commercial?
I think it's a pretty like flexible organization, it's more of like an ethos than anything else, like an ethos of making research open source and letting anyone contribute no matter what their background is. And so people can definitely, take that as they see fit. I think, lately we've been just focusing on like figuring out what the next interesting research questions are for us. And then of course, once we were able to flesh that out a little bit more, sharing it with the community and getting feedback. And I think it's a pretty organic process and evolution there. We're not necessarily trying to build out a think tank or an incubator or evangelize research of any sort. It's more of just this ethos of, collaboration.
Let's just answer the cool questions in that field.
Yeah.
Still, the technology, I think blockchain technology is kind of like a glue, I think, between many applications and domains, like finance, supply chain, identity, insurance, and many others, right? Almost every business sector can at some point employ blockchains, I think. But how do you then, introduce these other domains, for example, from economics or maybe sociology in the more hardcore math and cryptography research?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question. And fundamentally, a lot of these like blockchain projects and protocols really do require a lot of knowledge from this really interdisciplinary set of fields. So, for example, if a lot of projects right now are looking at decentralized governance, and for that, you need people who understand economics and sociology, and how we've built up governments in the past to figure out the best ways to implement decentralized governance. It's very much a non-trivial, very difficult problem, and that's where just understanding how algorithms work isn't necessarily going to be helpful. Or if you're looking at incentive design, like in proof of stake systems, for example, like how are you going to incentivize stakers to, participate in the protocol, and how are the slashing conditions going to work? That's when, economic modeling becomes very, very useful, and being able to think about all of these different actors and what their incentives are and model that somehow. I think, that's a really interesting area of research and a very new field in itself. And so, there are definitely a lot of interdisciplinary thinkers required from that point of view. And then, obviously there's from the development and from the getting products in the hands of users side, you need strong development, software development practices. You need, people who are able to design products that users can interact with and ensure that, the journeys are like the understand what users are thinking about, understand their journey, and then build products that best serve them. And then people to manage these projects. So I definitely think that there's a really interdisciplinary skill set, both on like the research side and the implementation side, and room for a lot of different people to get involved.
How many people usually work on a project in Mechanism Labs?
So far on any of our research projects, it's been like 3 to 4 people.
Okay. What are some of the processes that you're using, for exchanging ideas, maybe then also writing? I mean, are there any best practices that you found work quite well, with a diverse and multidisciplinary research topic like blockchain technology?
Yeah. I think similar processes to the normal research process work pretty well. So the way we've gone about it in the past is we'll start by brainstorming a lot of different, thoughts and ideas and having these whiteboarding sessions and trying to understand what problems are interesting. And then after we've narrowed in on a problem, looking at what different solutions could be, then we'll, go off and explore those on our own, look at previous literature in the space, come back together, brainstorm some more. And then eventually once we've gathered all of the information and, done a lot of the simulating and all of like when it comes time to put the information together, what we'll usually do is put it together in a very understandable, accessible way, like we did with the chart comparing all of the different consensus protocols. And then only after that, will we write it up into some sort of paper format. I think a big thing for us is also making sure to make the information accessible and as easy to digest as possible, which is why for the last paper, we also tried to write a series of blog posts that kind of dove into a lot of the topics that we touched on. And those blog posts are definitely a bit more accessible than the paper itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But that's something that's not really happening in academic research, is it? I mean, it's pretty much locked up in the ivory tower there.
That's true. I definitely, I think it would be really, really helpful if every time someone wrote a paper, they wrote an adjoining blog post or put together a resource that would help people understand it. Yeah, that would be really cool. I'd love to see more people doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just a little side note, that's how I started making my movies. I had a research project in Singapore, and it was an open data project, and nobody understood what I was doing there. And so somebody, as a joke, said, why don't you make a video, like something like an advertisement or like an ad or something for your project? And I did, and a few days after it was online, there was already like people, calling from the World Bank, interested in collaborating. And,
wow.
and that would have never happened with just a book. I published 2 books on the topic and nobody read those, but the movies, like almost 1 million people watched them. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You definitely have to, meet people where they are and keep up to date with the mediums of information sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Personally, which phase, of the research projects do you enjoy most?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Honestly, I think it's different with each project or each topic. Like, I'm sure it'll be very different from this more usability focused research than when we were looking at distributed consensus. I've tended to enjoy most parts of the process just because I'm learning and growing in a different way at each stage. So, if it's brainstorming, it's a lot about being very creative and, trying out lots of different ideas and testing out different things. When it comes to putting all the information together, it's, thinking about the person on the other side. So what is going to be understandable to them? Like, what's the best way to break down this information and put it together so it's the most useful? And that's also, a different kind of train of thought, because then you're not thinking necessarily about the specific technical problem at hand, but how to convey and communicate. And I think both sides of that process are important. I wouldn't necessarily say I prefer one to the other. But yeah, because it's just a different, set of learning and thinking and on each side.
With Mechanism Labs or also with SHE-256, how important is it for you to be in the Bay Area?
I think being in the Bay Area is definitely helpful, because just like being able to get out to different meetups and meet people is useful. But I definitely don't think it's a necessity at all. I think both of these organizations would have been able to exist and have pretty much the same trajectory as they have now, even if they weren't necessarily started in the Bay Area, just because this space in itself is so distributed. So, people will hop from conference to conference, and you'll meet people in Europe, then you'll meet people in Asia, and then you'll meet people in the Bay Area. And it's also super digital, so you can reach almost anyone, over the internet nowadays. So I think geography is a lot less limiting than maybe it was in the past. And so that's pretty great. And we definitely want to try, especially with SHE-256, to not have geography be a limitation. So open sourcing as many of our materials, all of our materials, recording as many of our events as we can. With the mentorship program, it was completely global, which is so cool. There are people who are partnered, from like the United States and Asia or Europe and South America, which is absolutely amazing. And more we want to be able to support events in different parts of the globe. But all of this will come as we're able to have the bandwidth to do all these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Alexis, did you always want to be a researcher?
Actually, no. I didn't really see myself getting into research. But I don't really know if so the interesting thing about research is that I think formal academic research, or getting a PhD or something like that, was definitely not something that had actually appealed to me previously. Now I definitely find it very interesting, and it's definitely something I would potentially consider. But I'm also very flexible in my thinking and ideas and paths. I don't necessarily think about things in like a certain way or like a certain pathway. I think it's more about like the knowledge gained and like the way you go about different things. Like, like most people like out there could do like a faux PhD program by finding, an advisor and working on the thesis themselves. And I think more and more we're going to see people kind of stepping outside of institutions a little bit and forging their own individual pathways. And so for me, I think it's more about learning and growth and solving problems that are interesting to me and developing the skill sets necessary to tackle those problems.
In your work or also in your life, I mean, who are your role models?
That's a good question. Definitely a difficult question. I'm inspired a lot by the people who I'm working with and the people around me. I think there's so much I can learn from just about anyone. And so I guess most of my inspiration comes from like the people around me. And that doesn't, necessarily just mean the people physically around me, but also like, the people like all across the globe who I'm able to interact with because of the internet. So whether that's on like Twitter or any other kind of discussion forum, and I'm able to talk to people with different ideas and different perspectives. I think that's definitely something that's really cool and informs in my thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What is one thing you're currently learning for yourself?
Well, recently we've been learning a lot about user research and how to go about that process as we've been conducting that usability study. And so that's been a new thing that I've been trying to learn. And so understanding those processes and how people have been thinking about them has been definitely pretty cool. And there's definitely still a lot more learning I have to do there. But excited as always.
What about the work-life balance? I mean, is that ever a problem for you?
Work-life. I mean, that's an interesting question. I definitely do what I find the most fulfillment and happiness with. And that for me happens to be like working on Sheet 56 and working on Mechanism Labs. Like these things don't necessarily feel like quote unquote work. Like these things are like what bring me fulfillment and happiness. And so I spend most of my time like on these things or like reading or learning.
Okay.
So yeah.
Alexis, what's a totally selfish wish for your own future?
Oh, that's an interesting question. A selfish wish for my own future. I guess like to continue to be able to have the opportunities to be able to like learn and grow and pursue problems that I'm interested in and not necessarily be hindered by like real world constraints as much as possible. Like if I could, be able to do that for the rest of my life, I think that'd be pretty amazing.
Alexis, this was great. Many thanks for taking time.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guest and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.